You so much for having me here. As I said, Nina, I have known Nina, God, it's been about 19 years now. It's been a very long time. And she's actually one of my personal heroes. When I was an undergrad, she definitely was one of the most inspirational people to me. She helped me feel comfortable about speaking out about things in different ways, using art as activism. She's phenomenal, phenomenal, phenomenal person. And thank you so much for having me here. I'm so glad to be able to kind of work with you like this. It's Women's History Month. And I have a speech that I might read or I might not, because I'm looking around the room and sometimes I kind of let it come to me. But I know that you're talking about themes of resistance and resilience and what that means. And I think particularly in this climate, this political climate that we all find ourselves in, we have to talk a lot about this idea of resistance, right? Because I think that we have these responsibilities as citizens to not just engage in the voting process or things like that. We have to be actively engaged every single day, because that's what we are. That's what makes a country what it is, a government of the people, for the people. So sometimes I get a little discouraged when I see people, displaying apathy because the government works for you. So at this time, I'm kind of talking to a lot of college students like, most revolutions that have begun in the world were with people your age, right? So it's like, you got to start thinking about what your role is going to be as we're dealing with this. So we're going to talk a little bit about resilience today. Because it's really interesting how people are finally waking up, right? And I'm very call and response because I'm Black. So when you're Black, you do call and response. And so I may talk to you and I may expect an answer. So please feel free to have this conversation with me. So a lot of you just now waking up, right? You're like, holy shit, oh my God, this dude is coming for all of us. Like, it's not just the colors, it's not just no, he's coming for all of us. He's gonna take my health care, my mama can't cover me no more, what if I get sick? It's coming into your space, perhaps in ways that it didn't before. Perhaps your parents weren't fully engaged because they were living pretty comfortably. Maybe you came from a pretty comfortable life and didn't really have to face too much of what other people have known for centuries, right? Cat Williams has this really interesting bit called "We're All Niggas Now." And so it's quite possible I could argue that we're in the niggardization of America right now because they hate everybody. And every way that we have felt oppression just for existing as Black people starting to spread. And some people are starting to get a taste of what it's like to live under a government that hates you, despises your very existence, wants you to be totally void of your personal human liberties, your civil liberties, things like that. Sucks, doesn't it? Okay, so here we are. We know a little bit about that. Might want to listen to us a little bit. Okay, let me read what this says. Okay, so all around the country, people are getting riled up, right? Protests happening, marches, Women's March, yeah. We'll talk about that in a bit. They're going to these town hall meetings, right? These town hall meetings have always existed, but now people are going because it's like, I told you I didn't want that damn Obamacare, but now you're taking away my ACA, and God damn it, ooh, that's not what I voted for. So they're angry. They're coming out of their houses, not on election day, but on other days. They're coming out. They're doing what's called a resistance, right? I feel like every day we wake up and there's another threat to something else. One day it's undocumented immigrants. The next day it's Muslims. The next day it's trans people. The next day it's, cis women. The next day it's this one, it's Black people. It's like every day there's something, some kind of thing that this man is signing off on or something that's happening that's attacking one of us. And what does that do to us? Feel free to answer. What does that do when they start attacking all these different groups at the same time? Right? It forces us to kind of divide and splinter off a bit and kind of focus on our own interests, right? And what happens when we splinter off? We're not working together. And what happens when a population is not working together to make the government work for all of the population? The government gets to do what the hell it wants. And that's what we see happening. right? So what does that mean? It means you have to resist. It means you have to engage. And what does that look like? Okay. I'm gonna tell you what it don't look like. I don't know, for the people watching, those pink pussy hats were so fucking ridiculous. Now here's the thing. I get that there were people that were making them, and for them they were participating in this kind of process of resistance, and I get that. But it was the most symbolic exclusion of trans women that I have ever seen in my life. Non-binary people, anybody who does not define themselves by their pussies. And I'm like, did y'all miss the last 5 years of social media? If that tells you anything, because that's where I learned so much. If you have been on Twitter for the last 3 to 5 years, you have to know that's a ridiculous thing to do right now, right? And so many people were rightfully offended. I'm not one of those people that gets mad at folks for being offended. If something offends you, just own that shit and then find a way to punch them in the mouth. So we're not all that smart to be going to airports which are federal jurisdictions and risking Fed time for people who don't have privilege. So when you have a man like Michael Moore, or whatever his name, what's the one, the guy that makes all those movies about how he hates boys, Michael Moore, right? Goes on Twitter and tells people, head to the airports to protest the Muslim ban. Here's this white, cisgendered, heterosexual man, we think, telling people to head to a federal jurisdiction where if you have strikes, if you're undocumented, if you have any of these things going on, they will lock your ass up. And this is a federal offense. They'll send out the National Guard. There was a lot of risk that was taken there because people were so angry and moving in that moment. And I said, if anything, we need to learn a little bit more from community organizers and people who have the sense to let people know, if you cannot do this, don't do it. And people ended up feeling bad, right? Because here's this whole resistance for this whole weekend of people going to these airports and protesting, and the lawyers were showing up and all those things. Yeah, those lawyers were privileged to show up. They could do that. They know how to get themselves out of it. But what about the people that wanted to take a stance and could not? They wanted to have their voices be heard and they could not. They couldn't get out of bed. They couldn't go because they couldn't risk arrest. They couldn't risk a deportation. How do we make sure that they're all included in this resistance, right? I was at home in my bed. I wasn't going to no airport. What? I've been arrested. I'm not. Nope. And I was just kind of watching as somebody who's been doing this for quite a bit. And I was like, okay, well, we have the energy, we have the momentum, but they can also see what we're capable of. And all they're doing is counting and seeing how many of us are willing to come out on this thing so they know how to counter it with our National Guard. I want you to understand how this government works and how suppression works when you talk about resistance. Every effort you all are coming up with, they are working on a counter effort. So always remember that. That's why these fights continue, because there's always a way that they can come back and kind of take over. So you got to start finding some other ways to resist, some other ways that might have a more lasting impact, be a little bit more meaningful in the long term. Because it's cool. I'm not going to chastise people that go to marches. I've been to a few. I've organized a few. I'm not going to chastise you if that's your thing. But you should also feel like you have to understand it's a little bit more than that. That raises awareness, and that's great for the people that have the privilege. And if you have that privilege and you don't have any risk, by all means, you go there. But we also have to talk about these other ways. We have to talk about policy, because it's really hitting us on the policy side. And I just did a talk with some folks who are very interested in peace and justice work, and everything that they were talking about doing was treating a symptom. It was treating a symptom of these larger issues. And I'm like, how many of you are interested in going into policy work? And only one of them said he was thinking about it. And so I'm like, okay, the next school I go to, I have to encourage you all to consider policy work. Because if you're coming with a social justice kind of lens, if you're coming with this intersectional lens and things like that, a lot of that work, we need your brilliant minds on that policy level. That's just my little plug, advertisement, push, consider it. Okay. We probably should be embracing intersectionality in our work, but we should also not forget that it's fundamentally and inherently about Black women. So when we have these conversations about intersectionality. We have to know where this comes from. Hi, you want to come talk with me? No? Okay. Okay. Kids are cute. We have to remember that this was based on this idea that Black women are both Black and women, and our rights, we're being denied our rights because we were both. And so now I see people talk about intersectionality, and what they're talking about is not related to race, not related to gender, and I'm like, nah, that's not quite it. So I want you all to be careful about when you are kind of using some of these buzzwords and using these ideas, that you're not straying far from what the purpose was. You should research Kimberly Crenshaw. You should research Florence Kennedy. You should familiarize yourself with those people who gave us these ideas, okay? And understand what they were for, okay? And I said in another talk, I said, when I hear like a gay white man who's disabled start talking about the intersectionality of his life, I just kind of blink a little bit. I'm just like, okay, I know you mean well, but it shows me that you don't have a full understanding of what this is about. And that may bother some people, but Black women are kind of tired of being erased from things. So we're a little bit bothered too, okay? We should probably be sounding alarms when children go missing, right? They have this thing called the Amber Alert. It's not called the Shaniqua Alert. Nobody cares when Shaniqua goes missing. If you haven't paid attention to the news, last couple of weeks, Black and Latino girls are going missing, just missing. They're adding to the 64,000 missing Black women and girls that exist in this country that are unaccounted for. That's 0.03% of the Black female population. What would happen if 0.03% of the white female population was just missing? We'd consider that an epidemic. We'd consider that a stop everything you're doing. We have a problem. And yet, this can exist for Black women and girls, and nobody bats an eye. In fact, when these girls go missing, they automatically categorize them as runaways, even when they're aged 2. And I was just telling someone on Twitter, this happened when I was in the Bronx and I was doing some work up there. I happen to live in a zip code where the most girls were going, being kidnapped or running away. And they labeled a 2-year-old as a runaway. How does a 2-year-old run away? By being born Black, right? We should be thinking about those things. We should be trying to expose this fake president that we have that's kind of was installed, who has only his own interests at heart. Doesn't give a damn about anybody or anything. It's all about money. And we saw it coming, and we tried, right? Some of us tried, right? You have 13% of Black men did not try. 6% of Black women did not try. 29% of Asians, 29% of Latinos, 53% of white women, a whole lot of white men. They didn't try. And yet we have this system where an electoral college can deny the votes of about 3 million people who wanted the other person. So what does that say to you? What's the issue there? Is it Donald Trump, or is it our electoral system? And if it's the system, what do we do about it? See, that's where I'm thinking, having been almost 4 decades on this planet. It's cool to show up to the protests and the rallies. It's cool to show solidarity. But a lot of this work has to be done on this macro level. And then we start looking, again, I'm pointing at you. We start looking at you all. That's what that resistance is. That's what that looks like. We have to change that policy. Electoral college is racist. You understand that, right? Go look into it. It's rooted in racism. So what are you going to do to fight that? I start thinking about these things all the time. Maybe we should listen to the people who have kind of had it right the whole time. I'll give you a hint. Starts with Black, ends with women. Because I want to tell you, right, in the history of this country, who's raised all the kids, who fed them from their breasts, denied their own children nourishment, who's been the primary caretakers. Who was it? Bill Clinton claimed to fame. Well, yeah, I had Black women feed me. I'm from the South. That's why I love chicken. I'm just going to play the saxophone and win all your hearts. And then I'm going to send all your asses to jail indefinitely. And you're going to get your grandmothers to support me on it because I'm going to flirt with them. I'm going to get them to agree that after 3 strikes, you should be thrown away in jail for the rest of your life. I'm going to seduce you with this Piper-ass saxophone. 94% of black women voted for Hillary Clinton. We voted for oppression, right? Most violent person that we've ever encountered has been white women. We know this. Yet we voted for one because we knew what was going to happen if we did not. It happened anyway, but we gave our best shot. And we tried to tell you all, tried to tell everybody, young millennials that were like, I'm not voting for her. She's just as bad. She's this. And you're talking a whole lot of shit. And now you're mad because your parents ain't going to be able to cover you on your health insurance. And you got mono. Right? So now everybody's talking about this. There's all these rallying cries to resist. Where were these cries 100 years ago during the Red Summer when blood was spilled across the streets of the country in race riots? Where was this call for resistance when Hitler was wiping people out, exterminating people? Where was the call for resistance when Rwandans were being massacred? Where was this call for resistance when we've been trying to accept refugees for the last 20, 30 years that have been blocked and nobody gave a damn? Now all of a sudden we care about the refugees, right? Now all of a sudden we care about undocumented people when President Obama deported more than anybody else had. Now we start to care about these things. Why now? Because it is starting to affect more people directly. And if you're somebody who has been doing this work for a long time, it's hard to not become resentful, right? You've been fighting for queer rights for 10 years. Now all of a sudden people care about whether or not a trans person can go to the bathroom. You didn't care 10 years ago when that person was struggling. They've been trying to push this stuff for years now. Now all of a sudden we care. And I say that with a tinge of bitterness because I'm tired. And a lot of my peers are tired, and that's why we come and talk to y'all, because it's your turn. We are worn down. We have seen this going. We have been trying to ignite fires under people to resist the stuff that goes on in this government for so long. And the people before us were trying. And now it's like, how do we capitalize on this energy? How do we, who have been completely resilient through time, bouncing back, always landing on our feet with all the scars and the trauma and everything that we've carried on our shoulders, we've been screaming out to everybody, we need to change things. And now people are listening because they care about opioid abuse now. People have been dying from heroin overdoses and opiate overdoses for decades. But it wasn't the right people dying. Now we have millennial children who are still living at home because they can't get jobs. They're ODing in front of their parents, in their parents' homes. And now it's an issue. Wasn't an issue when Shaniqua became a single mom because her husband that came back from the Vietnam War was addicted to heroin and needed help and couldn't get it. They didn't care then. They care now because Connor Jackson, whatever the hell his last name is, he spells Jackson Jaxon, he was found, nearly dead in his car that was totally paid off when he turned 16. Because he's not working, he wasted $100,000 on a liberal arts education that he doesn't use. He plays Mass Effect all day, and he uses heroin right in his parents' their home. And they could not believe their Connor would do that. And so now they're petitioning their government for help when we have been crying for help with substance abuse and addiction in our communities. I spent 15 years doing that work, dealing with this every day. So there's a little bit of a bitterness. Forgive me for that. We're not strangers to this struggle. And perhaps it's time to listen to the people who have endured it. How have Black women survived? If you are not a Black woman, you don't identify as such, that's the question you should be asking. Because if anybody's had the hardest damn time surviving, it's probably going to be a Black queer woman. Probably a trans woman who's disabled in some way. Ask her. how she's managed to survive, if she's made it past 35, right? Might get some tips. I became a feminist because I believed that I had a right to claim this fight. And if you know anything about the history of feminism, you know that there's been a lot of conflicts, racial conflicts, class conflicts. A lot of people kind of look at, feminism with the capital F as a middle class, white, cisgender, heterosexual woman's thing, right? That's what they look at it. And there's a lot of those types of people who would like to keep it that way. And so other people have had to find their own way, their own path to women's liberation and freedom, and it comes in different names. And I call myself a Black feminist because there is no separating my race from my gender, even though many people in my race would expect that I'm supposed to put race first. I remember going to, I think it was Yale, and I asked them, I said, I asked the women, I said, how many of you identify as Black first? And most of them put their hands up. And I'm just like, why? And then I started thinking about how Black women have been denied access to womanhood. Because what does it mean to be a woman? And that's something that you all have been kind of questioning and asking, what does it mean to be a woman? And even though we know now that we have the right to define that for and within ourselves, it has not always been like that. And there has not always been that freedom, particularly for Black women. And we've been denied the right to call ourselves women. Because when you do that, there's a certain connotation of delicate and, and worthy of protection. And why would you protect your mule? Why would you protect your workhorse? You need them to be doing stuff for you, right? So how do we access this thing, this feminist thing that's supposed to liberate all of us when people within the feminist movement don't even see us as one of them, right? I've always had that conflict. But then one day I was just like, hell no, I am a woman too. And I have the right to fight for my freedom and my liberation, and I'm going to fight for yours as well, even though you ignore me. And so I took on Black feminism. And then I got into sex-positive Black feminism. And why? Because again, if Black women are denied this access to womanhood, we surely are denied access to claiming our bodies for ourselves. And that also spills out into our sexual experiences, right? So many layers of disconnect and disjointed views of sexuality, sex and sexuality, whether it's coming from religion or trauma from enslavement or just that I'm having sex and I don't feel it because my ancestors didn't feel it either, that we're not talking about. And I've talked to enough Black women to know that even just the touching is hard for some. They can't even really feel it. So what does that say about generational trauma and sexual trauma? And what does it say when a sex-positive movement is mostly white? It's telling us, again, who is allowed to access sex and pleasure and those kinds of things? Who is allowed to be vocal and identifying for themselves? It surely wasn't us. And so I wanted to kind of make a name and get my image out there to encourage other women of color to speak up as well. So many types of feminism around this world that we don't even think about in this closed-in Western society. I've talked to West African women who I'm just like, can I just learn from you because you seem to have it? I don't know what we're doing over here, but you all seem to have it. Let's not be too arrogant that we can't learn from others that we seem to think are beneath us. Okay? All right, that's how I came into that. And so for me, I saw feminism as a path to liberation. And we talk a lot about liberation, but I'm not quite sure. And I've said this so many times, and I'm still trying to figure this out. I don't think we know what liberation is. I don't think we know what it looks like, right? So if you're thinking about liberation for a white trans man versus a queer Muslim woman who is Desi, versus an undocumented single mother from Mexico of 4 kids, to a disabled trans woman who, can't read. What does liberation look like for each of those people? Is it the same thing? And are we getting stuck in that place of assuming that liberation can spread across and be applicable to everybody in the same way? And do we even know what it looks like for ourselves? So when you start thinking about what your personal liberation looks like, what does that look like to you? Anybody have an idea? If you were to say, I am liberated What would it take for you to say that with confidence? Can anybody think of anything? There's no wrong answers, you know. But it's tough, isn't it? So what are we fighting for? What are we fighting for? What are we resisting? What are we working towards? And I think that is our perpetual struggle. We are so deeply rooted and defined by oppression that I'm not sure that we can see liberation as this thing that exists on its own, not completely tied to being the opposite of oppression. And I talk about this a lot because it's on my mind. I'm still trying to figure this out. And I'm hoping maybe one of these stops, somebody will give me an answer, because I don't, I don't know. And when I wake up after years of doing this, I'm like, what is it all for? What does liberation look like for me? Well, I can think of some things. I can think that we find all of these missing Black women, that we stop killing trans women of color, that we stop, I can say an end to all these things, but where's the affirmation? Where's the positive thing? Okay, I want love. I want a love that's not from a man who's been broken by generations of racism. Or I want a love from a woman who's not afraid to say she can love me back. I want my child to walk down the street and not have to worry about the cops stopping him when he's only 10 years old. And yes, that happened. I want to know that I can go into a store and I'm not going to be followed around. These are some of the things that I see that happen when I'm liberated. But to put it all together, does that apply to you or to you or to you? Are these things the same? So then we have to ask, how are we coming together and uniting to fight towards something we can't even define? There's no answer to that. I'm putting that out there for you, particularly as you are working through college and you're going to be graduating, and these are the years that kind of shape your identity. I'm going to ask you to think about this and what your next steps look like. Okay? I was born into poverty. My parents were not married. We had food stamps, we had rental assistance, Section 8. We were evicted because my dad gambled away the rent money. My parents finally did get married, then they got divorced. I've experienced homelessness. I've been through a lot. My first sexual trauma was when I was 4, and there have been several since then. And I took all of that and let it fuel me to get to where I am. But I realized that I was angry and bitter and filled with resentment. I was one of the most angry people. And I let that be the fire that pushed me. And then I started realizing this is not sustainable. Because if I'm only working towards helping other people, if I'm only working for justice because I'm angry and I'm running away from something, then I'm not doing it for the right reasons. And I realized that it had to come from a place of love. I'm in a place now where love is the foundation of all the work that I do. Love for myself, love for my people, love for the earth, love for the idea of freedom and liberation. Even if I don't know exactly what it is, I still hold on to it. And so for those of you that are looking to get into this kind of work, make sure that it's coming from the right place. Has to be love. Because if you don't love it, you can wake up one day and be like, I'm not doing this no more, and go on about yourself. No loss. Okay? Resilience is recognizing everything that you've been through and understanding the ways in which it has made you who you are. It's made you stronger. It's caused you a little bit of pain, but what you've learned from it, and how you can use those lessons and experiences towards helping others. Yes, helping others. I remain shocked by how many people don't even think about helping other people. Not even volunteering an hour a week for someone else. It doesn't even cross their mind that maybe I could give an hour of my time towards helping somebody else. I want you all to think about that, and I want that to change. I want you to personally commit to doing something at least once a week that does not serve yourself. Imagine if 320 million people took 1 hour a week and focused it on helping other people in need. Imagine what that revolution would look like. So how do you resist? You wake up in your own identity. You name yourself. You walk in a straight line. You don't move out the way when somebody you believe is higher than you comes in the way. Like, you know how sometimes as women we walk and then we see a man coming and we step aside? Don't step aside, bump his ass out the way. Same thing for black people. I notice with a lot of brothers that I love, I notice when white people come towards them, they shrink away. What the hell are you shrinking away for? We free. 160 years damn near free. You can walk and do what you need to do. Okay? When you decide that your name is dead and you have a name that represents yourself, claim that name. They tell you can't write it bigger. Get a Sharpie. I told you this was my name. Call me that. Don't answer when somebody uses your dead name. And respect someone enough that when they tell you what their name is, that you use it. Have you noticed how like nasty some people get when they're like, I'm not calling you that. Okay, shithead, I'm just gonna call you shithead until the end of the day because I call you what the hell I want. You wanna be a shithead? I'm gonna call you a shithead. Because it's unnecessary. These are the simple things that we could be doing that people reject. Just treating people with humanity. And we talk a lot about allies and things like that and this whole resistance and resilience thing. And you know, I don't believe in allies. If you know me, I don't believe in that. Because the definition means reciprocal benefit. And nobody who has these privileges can experience anything that an oppressed person is going to feel when they are fully liberated. It will not affect you the same way. It will not benefit you the same way. So I talk about being good people. And people are like, well, what do you mean? If I'm telling you to be a good person and you ask me, what do you mean? That's where you have to begin. You don't even know how to be a good person. Being a good person means living with honor and integrity and treating people better than you would treat yourself, particularly if you are struggling with identity issues and a lack of self-love. Treat somebody better than you would treat yourself. I want when all of you leave here, this college and this situation, I don't want it to be one of those things that you just spent a few years getting this education that you think is going to help you get a better job, or you're like, yeah, college helped me figure out who I was, and all this. I mean, that's great, but we don't have time for that right now. We are in a very different age and era in this country's history. Like, I'm not exaggerating when I say that this country is on the brink of self-destruction. And countries have done that. They've folded before and they've rebuilt themselves, and if you history buffs know a little bit about that. America's still a pretty young country. Perfect timing for her to self-destruct. But what will that rebuilding look like? There were people that were like, yeah, I hope Trump wins so we can start a revolution. Vulnerable people are the ones that are going to suffer the most in that kind of a revolution. That's not what we're wishing for. But we do hope that it does spark more engagement. The time is now, and we are all looking at you in any ways that we can build these gaps and make these connections to continue to resist and maybe show you a little bit about being resilient. We can do that. But you have to center freedom and liberation in your thoughts and your actions. Like, we need all of you. We need all hands on deck. Whatever your personal biases are, gotta check them. Gotta check them. People get mad at me when I bring up the fact that, all the beauty supply stores in the black neighborhoods are owned by Asians that don't live there and don't contribute to the neighborhood and still follow us around and treat us like shit. Because anti-blackness is global. It's a global currency. There is no part of this world that hasn't been touched by benefiting from anti-blackness. You see what I'm saying? So we got to check those biases. We stand up for, we're against the Muslim ban, and yet you can call me a slave still. And don't think I know what you're talking about. That's not how this works. Got to check your biases. We have black men that are talking about black liberation, and then they want to oppress black women. That's not how this works. It's not going to be that way. We have people of color who are citizens, natural-born citizens here, who are talking about immigrants, and they need to wait, and they're going to do the jobs that we don't want. You need to shut up. That's not how this works. And we need to get it together. Because while we still struggling with this, we don't want to include trans women in feminism. We got fucking missiles pointed at our country right now. Okay? We have people voting to strip millions of people of the health care insurance that they need. We have people voting to deny people reproductive rights. We have private prisons being built every day. We need each other. So I want you to look around this room and look around your campus. And before the end of this year, introduce yourself to somebody that you have never spoken to who is totally different from you, just in appearances. Introduce yourself and say, whatever, I just wanted to get to know you. I just wanted to introduce myself. Maybe we can connect on something. I don't know anything about you, but I'm stepping out on faith. And if you can do it here on this campus, you can do it in the real world, because that's what I do all the time. That's what my work is. I go out and I reach all these people. I talk to all of them. How can we do this? How can we save this world? How can we work together? I don't know nothing about the deaf community, but I'm willing to learn. What can I do to help? So I started posting transcripts of my YouTube talks. Had never thought of that before. Imagine what you can learn when you open your mind. All right? Y'all ready? I'm talking about real resistance. This is real resistance. These are little ways in which we are resisting against this nonsensical tyranny. Can I count on y'all? Yeah, oh, okay. Somebody is there, you know. But thank you. I want to thank you so much for having me here, and I hope that your programming continues. That is wonderful and everything. I know it will be if Ms. Nina is behind it. Thank you so much for having me here today, and I will be around if you have any questions. If anybody has any questions now, we can feel free to ask them. If not, I'll be drinking some tea somewhere. Thank you very much. Yay, thank you. Okay, I'm done.